London, June 1910. The body of a woman is found in the basement of Dr. Hawley and Cora Crippen, the latter of whom hasn't been seen or heard from in half a year. The doctor is also nowhere to be found, but is soon caught and arrested for his wife's murder. He's tried, convicted, and executed within the year. At first glance, this case might seem like a relatively predictable, open and shut one, but nearly a century after it had seemingly concluded, new DNA discoveries would throw it into a tailspin. This is the case of Hawley and Cora Crippen. Hawley Harvey Crippen was born in 1862 in Coldwater, Michigan. He attended the University of Michigan in 1882, where he studied homeopathic medicine. He left after a year and earned a degree elsewhere. He married and had a son, but his wife died in 1892. After her death, he sent his son to live with another family member and moved from Ohio, where he was at the time, to New York. Later that year, a now 30-year-old Hawley met a Brooklyn teenager who went by Cora Turner. At that time, Cora, whose real name was Clara McMatoski, was living under the protection of a man, as Crippen would later put it. The couple married that same year and moved to London in 1897. Hawley Crippen worked as a homeopathic doctor and Cora as a music hall singer, who went by the stage name Belle Elmore. By most accounts, the Crippens' relationship was not a good one. Dr. Crippen would later testify that his wife was pleasant to others in public, but different behind closed doors. Based on my research, Cora seemed to wear the proverbial pants in the relationship. She was often characterized as shrewd, brash, and overbearing, her husband as docile and submissive. He would also say his wife was rather hasty in her temper, and that later on in their marriage she was always finding fault with me, and every night took the opportunity of quarreling with me, so that we went to bed in rather a temper with each other. Both spouses cheated on each other numerous times. By 1904, Cora was seeing a fellow music hall singer named Bruce Miller, and Dr. Crippen had begun a relationship with his young secretary, Ethel Leneve, the previous year. After the affair with Bruce Miller began, the Crippens started sleeping in separate bedrooms. Dr. Crippen also told Leneve that he would marry her if Cora ever divorced him. The month before her disappearance, Cora reportedly told her husband she was going to leave him and take all of their savings. Cora Crippen was last seen at a dinner party at their home on the evening of January 31st, 1910. An attendee of the party would later say everything seemed normal that night. According to Dr. Crippen, he and Cora got in yet another argument as the party wound down, and she once again told him she was leaving him for good. She'd also apparently said he would have to cover up whatever scandal might occur from their permanent separation. He claimed the last time he saw her was between 2 and 3 a.m. when they went to bed. The next morning, Crippen didn't see his wife when he woke up. He left the house for work around 8:30 that morning, then came back home that evening and she still wasn't there. He would later tell their friends who had been at the party that Cora had gone to America, then later on said she'd gotten sick and died there. Not long after Cora was last seen, Ethel Leneve moved into the Crippen house. That June, when he was still unable to produce his wife's body, he told his landlord the same story, that his wife had gone to America and gotten sick and died there. However, he later changed that story and said she'd actually left him for another man. He said he lied because he didn't want to admit that his wife had left him. He also told the story to the police, who would return to the home a few days later, and Dr. Crippen was nowhere to be found by this point. Then police searched the home and made a gruesome discovery. In the basement of the Crippens' apartment building was a human torso. Later investigation would show the victim had been poisoned before being dismembered. Surgeon Augustus Joseph Pepper of St. Mary's Hospital examined the remains at the home. He found a scar on the corpse's abdomen that matched one Cora Crippen had. Women's clothing was also found with the corpse, clothing that matched a pair of pajamas belonging to Cora, along with what Pepper would later describe as women's hair due to its length and the fact that it was bleached. To police at the time, there was only one conclusion. These were the remains of Cora Crippen. And it didn't take long to find her suspected killer. Hawley Crippen had fled to Canada with Ethel Leneve, the latter disguised as a teenage boy. The captain of their ship later recognized Crippen from his wanted poster and thought it was odd that he was traveling with his teenage son, who was very clearly neither a teenager or a boy. He sent a message to the police using the Marconi wireless system, a fairly new technology at the time that would also famously be used on the Titanic 2 years later. When Crippen and Leneve arrived in Quebec on July 31st, 1910, they were both arrested and taken back to London for trial. Crippen's trial was such big news, it would later be compared to the O.J. Simpson trial in terms of publicity and media. When Crippen took the stand, he maintained his story that his wife had simply left him, saying he lied about her death to avoid a scandal. He claimed to know nothing about the body in the basement, saying it must have already been there when the couple moved into the apartment in 1905. However, a buyer for the company that made the pajamas identified them as ones they'd purchased in late 1908 and early 1909, so this shouldn't have been possible. In October of 1910, Hawley Crippen was found guilty of murder and was executed the following month. Ethel Leneve, his secretary/lover, was charged with being an accessory to murder, but was acquitted. They maintained their relationship until his execution. After Crippen's death, Leneve went back to Canada for a few years before moving back to London, where she got married and had children. She died in 1967, and her children only learned about her past when reporters approached them about it in the 1980s. So like I said at the beginning of this video, this seems on the surface to be a pretty open and shut case. We have a woman who went missing. She had a tumultuous relationship with her husband. The husband acted strangely after her disappearance and even fled the country. It seemed like the Crippen case was destined to go down in history as just another tragic case of spousal murder. But in 2007, things changed. By this point, toxicologist John Trustrail at Michigan State University, where Dr. Crippen himself had briefly attended, had been fascinated with the case for years, but there was something about it that struck him as odd. According to Trustrail, most murderers who poison their victims choose to do so because they're trying to make the death look like an accident. So it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for them to turn around and dismember the victim afterward. As Trustrail told The Guardian that year, in my database of 1,100 poisoning cases, this is the only one which involves dismemberment. In the late 1990s or early 2000s, Trustrail and a genealogist named Beth Willis set out to find Cora Crippen's surviving relatives. When the MSU lab tested the remains of the body in the basement against some of Cora's grand and great-grand nieces, they soon made two mind-blowing discoveries. Not only was this person not related to Cora Crippen, the body was that of a male. Needless to say, these finds were a big deal. The body in Hawley Crippen's basement, believed to be his wife, and the discovery of which led to his arrest for her murder, wasn't even her. Did this mean that Cora Crippen hadn't really died back in 1910? Trustrail did find a document that was supposedly a letter from Cora to her husband, saying she was in the US and was just gonna let him be executed. However, this letter was later determined to be a hoax. He also found records of a Belle Rose arriving on Ellis Island from Bermuda in 1910. 10 years later, this woman was living with Cora Crippen's sister in New York. Remember, Cora's stage name was Belle Elmore. Could this have been a pseudonym for the real Cora Crippen? As of 2025, this hasn't been proven or disproven, and the whereabouts of Cora Crippen remain a mystery. And there has been some pushback to these findings. In 2008, Davis Aaronovitch wrote an article in the Times Online titled, "I'll eat my hat if Dr. Crippen was innocent, okay?" Among other things, Aaronovitch was skeptical of the DNA testing that supposedly proved the remains were male, and claimed the case had been sensationalized for television, since the finding of the corpse's gender were aired on a PBS special. In a 2010 BBC article, genealogist Jonathan Minguez gave a similar criticism. After the DNA results were publicly revealed in 2007, Patrick Crippen, a distant cousin of Hawley Crippen, requested a pardon and for his remains to be returned to the US from their resting place in London. He also believes Crippen couldn't possibly have gotten a fair trial because of all the publicity surrounding the case. However, the case was not reopened because Patrick Crippen was determined to not be a close enough relative. So, what on earth happened here? Was Hawley Crippen really innocent of his wife's murder? If so, why was there a male corpse in his basement? Who was this man in life? Who killed him? And what really happened to Cora Crippen? When it comes to online speculation about this case, most people seem to follow one of three major theories. The first theory is that the jury got it right. Hawley Crippen was guilty as charged. Proponents of this theory point out that everything was just too big of a coincidence. The couple's tumultuous relationship, the fact that he fled the country after she went missing, Cora leaving most of her belongings behind, and a pajama set matching the one she owned being found along with her body. Proponents of this theory claim the DNA evidence that supposedly proves the body is not Cora is simply inaccurate, that it was maybe contaminated or just really old. Others wonder if Cora's DNA didn't match up with her relatives because she was secretly adopted and had androgen insensitivity syndrome. According to the Cleveland Clinic, androgen insensitivity syndrome is a rare sexual development disorder. People with AIS are male, but unable to develop any external male genitalia and are often raised as girls. If the body really was Cora's, this would explain why it had a Y chromosome, a clear indication that someone is male, and why everyone also thought Cora was female. Males with AIS are also infertile, and as far as I could find, Cora never had any biological children. Interestingly, though, there was a related theory at some earlier point that Cora's death was the result of a botched abortion. This might be due in part to the fact that a drug called hyoscine, which was often used in illegal abortions at the time, was found in the corpse's system. However, if the corpse was biologically male, this obviously wouldn't be possible. The second theory is that Dr. Crippen was both framed and guilty. As this theory goes, he really did kill Cora, and the police knew it, or at least suspected, but could never find her body. So they planted the body in the basement so they could at least appear to have enough evidence for an arrest. Several people who believe this theory pointed out that this crime occurred not too long after the famous Jack the Ripper murders, which of course also happened in the same city. The murders were probably still relatively fresh in the public's mind, and they had to have been a black spot on the police force since they could never catch him. Because of this, they might have been even more motivated than usual to create a scapegoat for the disappearance and make themselves look good. There's also been speculation that the body in the basement is actually one of Cora's lovers, also killed by her husband. This, of course, would explain why the body was male and not genetically related to Cora. And it's not too big of a stretch to believe someone might kill the person their spouse was cheating on them with. Of course, that raises more questions like, what would the man's loved ones have done when they realized he was missing? The last theory is that Cora was the real mastermind behind all of this. She really did leave her husband, and despite all the publicity surrounding the case, managed to stay under the radar for the rest of her life. There are one of two possible reasons as to why she never came forward and let her husband be executed for a crime he presumably didn't commit. One, she knew the identity of the body in the basement, maybe even was an accomplice in his murder, and didn't want to reveal her part in the crime. Two, she set her husband up herself, somehow planting the body to frame him for her murder out of spite and bitterness over their failed relationship. Personally, I think this is a bit far-fetched, but as always, I will let you decide for yourself what you believe. We may never know just what happened in the Crippen household on that January evening in 1910. But whatever you think about the case, one thing's for sure. It is absolutely fascinating. With the modern DNA evidence, I get the feeling people are going to be talking about this case for years to come.